there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you?
Sing it, sister.
It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. You say I took the name in vain, though I don't even know the name. But if I did, well, really, what's it to ya? There's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter what you've heard, the holy or the broken. Hallelujah. Oh, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Oh, I did my best, it wasn't much. Couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I've told the truth, I didn't come to fool ya. And even though it all went wrong, I stand before the Lord in song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. Sing it. Hallelujah.
Thank you.
Amen.
That was one of Bob's favorite songs. Oh, great earth, thank you. Well, the sharings by the family has been so beautiful. Well, and beautiful. I last saw Bob, fittingly enough, at the IONS conference in Oakland, California at the Marriott Center last fall. I knew he had just emerged from from a hospital stay. And I was surprised and very pleased to see him looking pretty good and emitting healthy energy in his gait and full of his usual curiosity and pack of questions. When his sister told us about the airmen that he helped save and how they took turns all night talking to him, I'm sure he was asking them questions all night long. David Corton and I had just finished our public dialogue to a pretty large group, and we hung around to chat with folks. And I was very unprepared for what happened next. People started going away to their next sessions, and Bob came up to me. And he followed me out of the large hall, and he was talking to me for so lengthy a time that pretty soon the halls of the conference center were completely empty. Everyone was off to the next workshop. But Bob and I were alone in the empty corridors of that vast place. Two things occurred to me at the time. Number one, I was not going to get to the talk that I had marked on my program that seemed real interesting to me to attend. And number two, I was not going to shake Bob off. This guy wanted to talk. He was really persistent. And I think that theme has already come up tonight, that when Bob got his sights on something, he stuck to it. I did not know why he was so persistent. But in retrospect, I do. Today I know. His conversation was about how much my work had affected his life. How original blessing undid almost all of his theology training at Princeton Seminary.
Yes, son.
How the four paths of creation spirituality gave a name to his life's work, his battles, whether in Sacramento State Houses or on the streets or the People's Marches in Washington. How creation spirituality grounded his political science degree in a spirituality he could believe in and could live out, and that connected his science and his deepest spiritual yearnings. Bob was a seeker, wanting to connect his Christian roots to today's science. Of course, his father was a minister and missionary. And he wanted to approach ethical issues, from ecology to women's rights to racial injustice. For him, the concept of original blessing and creation spirituality were very important. Creation, after all, is what we all have in common. And as already been alluded to, he found a lot of spiritual juice in nature, in the sky, in the forest, in all of it. At this meeting, he told me he had just finished my recent book on Thomas Merton. I really couldn't believe it, because here the fellow was in a hospital, was struggling for his life, but he's still reading. And he loved what Merton said about inner space and outer space. Now, Thomas Merton, who was a Catholic monk of considerable stature, he died in 1968. Frankly, he was assassinated the same year that Robert Kennedy and King were assassinated. I've proven that now. I've proven it. He was one of the few intellectuals in the 1960s, Merton was, who questioned the trip to the moon. Now, this is something IONS needs to hear. Listen to what he wrote back then, Thomas Merton. Even if we can fly, so what? There are flying ants. Even if man flies all over the universe, he's still nothing but a flying ant until we recover a human center and a human spirit in the depth of our own being. What can we gain by sailing to the moon if we are not able to cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves?
Well,
This is the most important of all voyages of discovery. And without it, all the rest are not only useless, but disastrous.
amen.
I think that passage in my book on Merton leapt out right into Bob's consciousness and his ion consciousness, because Edgar Mitchell was about the same thing. What if we as a country, we as a species, had heeded Merton 60 years ago and had put as much effort into developing human consciousness, dealing with violence, and that which we carry with us wherever we go, as he proposed. if we had done more of a balance, reaching for the inner space as well as for outer space. That's what ION stands for, and that's what Bob was about. Even though I was enjoying my talk with Bob, I confess that emotionally I was a bit annoyed by Bob's persistence. I'm just being honest. I often get nice feedback after a talk, and sometimes not so nice. But whether you're getting praise or punishment, usually one moves on. And I've learned over the years not to take either too seriously, the praise or the criticism. But Bob was not moving on. He hung around, and he hung on me, telling me lots of stories of his life and work and the influence of my work on his. Even when I went to the bathroom, he was there. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't shake him. It is only in retrospect, after he died a few months later, that I figured out what our encounter in Marriott, Oakland was all about. He was thanking me. He was thanking me. But more than that, he was recounting his own life and work and journey, and in the process thanking all of us and life itself for the journey. We are all here today to say, you are welcome to Bob, and to say thank you back to Bob also. In John's Gospel, there is the line, I am the resurrection and the life. Now, scholars tell us Jesus didn't say those things. Those are put into his mouth after he died by the community who was so turned on by him. So those are words of the cosmic Christ, not of the historical Jesus. Gotcha. But nevertheless, they're very powerful words because, as the poet brought up and others today, the question about what's next is on most people's minds, one time or another. So what is this thing called resurrection? St. Thomas Aquinas, a brilliant theologian from the 13th century, who, by the way, spent his whole life bringing science into religion. And at that time, like today, the fundamentalists were freaked out. They felt all the answers were already there. He said, Aquinas says there are two resurrections. The first is waking up in this lifetime. Waking up in this lifetime. And if you've done that, you don't have to worry about the second.
Oh, well.
Those of us who knew and worked with Bob can say, I think, that Bob was one who woke up in this lifetime. First, he was awakened by truth. This is why he asked so many questions. This is why he spent so much time studying science, theology, political science, cosmology. Why he was so committed to ions, where the scientific quest for truth meant so much to him. He resonated, and he told me this last conversation we had, with Aquinas' observation, which I often repeated. Revelation comes in two volumes, nature and the Bible. Science studies nature. Science, therefore, is a source of revelation. Duh. Bob liked to call himself a connector. A connector. He liked to connect science and revelation, the mystics and the prophets. Secondly, Bob was awakened to justice and to injustice. That will come up continually, the news of injustice. Kabir, the great Indian mystic, says, you've been asleep for millions and millions of years. Why not wake up this morning? I think Bob was kind of living that question his whole life. And this is why he was an activist. Or in other language, he was both a mystic and a prophet, a lover and one who interferes with injustice. And he told me how these categories of mysticism and prophecy were so important to him. Hafiz, the Sufi mystic, says, it is a naive person who thinks we're not engaged in a fierce battle. For I see and hear brave foot soldiers all around me going mad, falling on the ground in excruciating pain. But you could become a victorious horse person and carry your heart through this world like a life-giving sun, S-U-N. But only if you and God become sweet lovers. I think Bob was on that kind of a journey. His spirit life, his developing of his powers of love, expressed already so many ways in this sharing, certainly with his family and all, that was as much a part of his life as was his warriorhood to stand up to injustice. Growing up in China, as we learned, Bob became attuned as a boy to what it meant to be a minority, an outsider, to be of another race, another culture, speaking another language. And he never forgot that lesson when he saw the injustice of racism and oppression of minorities in his own country. The truth of suffering caused by injustice, racism, anthropocentrism was very real to him. It fed his passion for racial, economic, and eco-justice, especially. He seeded trees, he planted many a redwood in addition to take on forces that are killing the planet as we know it. Now, the heart of my talking about Bob's resurrection, his awakening to truth and to justice, is this short sentence from Thomas Aquinas also. He says, the proper objects of the heart are truth and justice. That is so interesting. Taking truth and justice out of just the head into the heart. That is the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Well,
And that is what Bob was about his whole life. That's why he was a lover of wisdom, a true philosopher and activist who acted out of that love. Bob's passion and constancy speak to this. Bob had a good heart, a deep heart, a passionate heart, a truthful heart, a musical heart, a justice-seeking heart. There, truth and justice flourished. Or as Meister Eckhart puts it, compassion is where peace and justice kiss. Compassion is where peace and justice kiss. In Bob's heart, they kissed, and they kissed often. Now, I introduced our gathering today with some thoughts about death. It is good to contextualize our lives in the presence of death at a memorial service that remembers a life well lived. Many other reflections on death by our ancestors, its meaning, its mystery, the question, what if anything comes afterwards? So let us consider a few brief thoughts from different traditions. Black Elk said this: the white man will never be alone. Let him be just and deal kindly with my people, for the dead are not powerless. The dead are not powerless. Dead, did I say? There is no death, only a change of world.
well,
That is from indigenous wisdom. Meister Eckhart said, at death, life dies, but being goes on. The new science tells us that the new cosmology, a supernova lives and dies, but it resurrects because it spreads its seeds to other generations of new life. If this is true of a supernova, surely it's true of us too, that we too live, die, and resurrect. Hildegard of Bingen said, no warmth is lost in the universe. No warmth is lost in the universe. And Einstein said, no energy is lost in the universe. And I say, no beauty is lost in the universe. And Hafiz, the Sufi mystic, says, If your life was contained in God's cup, how would you be so brave? If your life was not contained in God's cup, how would you be so brave and laugh and dance in the face of death? Your existence, my dear, oh love, my dear, has been sealed and marked too sacred by the beloved to ever end. Indeed, God has written 1,000 poems all over your heart that say life, life, life is far too sacred to ever end. And finally, another Mesoamerican poet from 2,000 years ago, whose name I cannot pronounce. I'll make a shot at it. Nazahualcotel, whatever. He says this: thus we are mortal. Men through and through, women through and through. We all will have to go away. We all will have to die on earth. Within myself, I discover this: indeed, I shall never die. Indeed, I shall never disappear. There where there is no death, there where death is overcome, let me go there. My flowers will not come to an end. My songs will not come to an end. I, the singer, raise them up. They are scattered. They are bestowed. And now, in the additional stories and sharings that we carry of Bob and which we shared now, we will be taking in Bob's flowers in songs that he scattered and bestowed in his lifetime. They will be recalled for us by our storytellers. So let us listen joyfully and heartfully with gratitude for the stories that we're about to hear.